Happy Tuesday, my dear friends. How we doing? We had a little last minute unexpected left turn, I suppose, with the magic show today. So we're gonna revisit our guest for this week. But in the meantime, I wanted to hop on and share something that has it honestly is one of the most important distinctions I think I've ever I say discovered, but I obviously didn't discover it. But it's something that I started to notice creeping up in myself, in my clients, in my really ambitious friends, and actually came up in a conversation that I was in over the weekend. So I had some friends, they flew into town and we got to do a bunch of exploring around Colorado. And so while we were driving and hiking, we had a lot of time to talk. And this one particular friend who was we were traveling with started to talk about how she was starting to feel just unsettled, like feeling frustrated that despite having had done all of this awesome stuff, she was having a really hard time making what she wanted to create in her life come true. And she is brilliant. She's intelligent, she's educated, she's doing all the things. But in her experience, she's just never getting closer. And I'm calling this Why You're Never There Part 2 because one of the probably the most common challenges that the people that I work with face is that despite knowing what you want, doing what you want to do, working toward it, even maybe achieving it, there's this feeling of just not being there. And the distinction that I want to talk about today is the difference between a vision and what I have started to call a trauma mirage. Now, let me just take a second and slow down and define what I mean by trauma, because trauma doesn't necessarily have to be some really intense traumatic experience that you had at any point in your life, although it often is. And more, I find the majority of people have experienced some level of trauma. And when I talk about trauma, I'm talking about physical abuse, sexual abuse, but also growing up in families with addiction or having a death in the family or growing up in extremely unstable circumstance, whether it's mental illness or financial instability. So I want you to loosen up your definition of trauma because it can also include just really painful emotional experiences that as a kid you may have interpreted as way more traumatic than you would have now. But it's really important to understand that what I'm really talking about when I talk about trauma is really intense emotional experiences that weren't completely processed and they're still kind of live in your system. And when I say live in your system, what I really mean is that unresolved trauma, unresolved heavy emotional experiences, in Buddhism, they call them the hungry ghosts because it's like no matter how much you feed them, it doesn't go anywhere. And so when we are experiencing that unresolved trauma in our lives, it has us kind of endlessly chasing. And we chase on the material because we're human beings. And the human part of us, the ego part of us, is always trying to fill that hungry ghost with the only things that make sense. And our five senses all exist in the physical world. So we start chasing. But that chasing, even though we hit our goals, doesn't ever feel super satisfying. So that's what I'm talking about. And what I've started to notice in the 10 plus years that I've been working with people is that this hungry chasing can really lead to an experience of burnout and frustration and disenchantment over the time, or lots of anxiety fueled productivity that on one level can feel pretty good, but like has this undercurrent of like, when is this ever going to end? And can this ever end? And is there another way to do this? And when am I going to really feel happy? That's the kind of experience that I'm talking about. And so I started to notice that there's this very distinct difference between myself and my clients and the people that I know when they are actually succeeding and thriving inside and out versus when they're not. So the difference between a vision and a trauma mirage is something that I think like I cannot even underestimate the importance of really kind of feeling into this difference. And I hear Marcia saying kind of gnawing feeling of unwellness. Yes, Marcia, that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's like despite looking at everything you're experiencing that should feel good, you don't feel good. And I still slip into this from time to time. And I'll kind of share like a personal story of where I really started to see this. it never, in Buddhism, they talk about all desire is a projection of the past. And I thought that was really interesting the first time I read it. All desire is a projection of the past. And so whether or not you subscribe to that doesn't really matter. But I thought it was an interesting concept. And it absolutely defines trauma mirage with perfection. So a trauma mirage is an unconscious, quote, vision that we put in our future that represents the opposite of something that we experienced in our past that was awful. So an example of this was several years ago. I was talking to a coach, and when they came in, they were telling me about what they wanted. They said they wanted like multiple seven-figure businesses, and they wanted it all within 6 months, and they had all these other aspects of this vision that they really wanted. And I just thought it was interesting how extreme this vision was. It just kind of struck me as odd. And there's nothing wrong with having a massive vision, but it just struck me as kind of odd. Now, not all trauma mirages have to be extreme to be considered a trauma mirage. But as we started talking, what we kind of figured out was that their childhood had been just awful. They grew up feeling unwanted, unloved, uncared for, completely rejected for who they were. And even though that if you were just to look at like, okay, seven-figure business versus feeling totally unloved and unwanted, you could see that one wouldn't replace the other. But the really important thing to understand about a trauma mirage is that they're unconsciously created. So I thought I would create a list of the difference between a vision versus a trauma mirage so that you can start to understand the difference and really feel into in yourself which one you're operating from. Because when we operate from vision, and I don't even have to mean like a great vision, but from vision, which is actually from within, it feels very different, much more uplifting, and honestly, much more effective in creating the external results and the internal satisfaction than when we're operating from a trauma mirage. As I'm going through this list, my request of you is to actually get honest with yourself, because it can be hard to face the fact that you might be chasing a trauma mirage than a vision, because likely you've been holding on to this for a very long time. You maybe as long as you can remember. You might not even have any idea when this picture came online. And it's also important to know, in being honest with yourself, that it doesn't even mean you have to give it up. It's just, it might shift, it might not, but likely the way you approach it will be very different. So if any of this is resonating or landing, let me know. Tell me in the chats, and let me know if you're kind of, oh, Montana, hey, hi, love you. Speaking right to my soul. Hey, girl, that's because I've been there. So let me know as this is coming up, like what parts of it are specifically resonating. If you feel cool to share here, if not, message me in the chat. We can start to talk about it. Because again, I know I keep coming back to this, but pulling these two things apart, super, super, super liberating. Okay, so let's break down the differences. A vision has the energy of moving toward something. Now, this is where you kind of got to get non-physical and feel into your body. You're being pulled toward something. A trauma mirage feels like you're running from something. This is where self-awareness is really important, because they can be hard to discern. Because in my perspective, in my experience, chasing a vision is more like running from something. Because when we're pulled towards a vision, like when I wrote my book, it practically wrote itself. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be super easy, but there's just a different energy that allows us to flow more freely toward that thing, where a trauma mirage has us running from something. Now, I wanted to, well, I'll bring in this metaphor later to help really nail this down. But Marcia says, thank you for coming on and discussing an important issue. Yeah, thanks for being here. The second thing is that a vision feels inspired, where a trauma mirage feels compulsive. We feel inspired to take action towards a vision. We feel inspired in our being when we think about it. But a lot of the time, when we're experiencing and chasing a trauma mirage, there's much more of a compulsive sense of urgency behind it. That doesn't mean you don't want to be excited and like eager to go and create your vision, but there isn't this compulsive, almost addictive energy behind working towards your trauma mirage. Now, here are some ways you might notice that you're in a compulsive energy around creating a trauma mirage. One is you have a really, really, really hard time not working. And I don't mean the like, I love my job so much, I just want to work on it. I mean, I can't really step away. I find myself working on my vision 12 hours a day. Another really, you have like an obsession with productivity. You might find that you're working, but you're not even 100% sure what you're doing or how it's relevant. You just feel like you have to work. That's a really good indication that you're coming from a compulsive versus an inspired energy. A vision often feels playful. And if not playful, at least it's kind of like another word for inspired, but there's another energy where it's like it's a little bit more relaxed, where a trauma mirage feels very high stakes. It feels playful from the inspired vision perspective, like I'm just going to keep moving toward this and taking action towards it. Trauma mirage is like, if this doesn't happen today, there are going to be serious consequences. And this again is all very vague. You might be saying these things, but it also might be more of a vague gnawing inside. A vision is inclusive, meaning that it doesn't have to completely consume your entire being in the creation of it. Again, there will be times that you're so lit up about something that it is all consuming. And that's not what I'm talking about. My husband is starting a business right now, and he's so excited that it is consuming all of his energy. It's all he wants to work on. It's all he wants to do. It's all he wants to talk about. But that's not what I'm talking about. He's really excited. It's coming to form. He's taking it one step at a time. But he's also not shutting out the rest of his life. He's still exercising. We're still hiking. We're still doing things. When I'm in vision, I have plenty of time for friends. On the days that I'm most connected to vision and not trauma mirage, it's unbelievable what I can do. And give me your favorite emoji if this resonates with you. When you're coming from vision and you're in this place of being super inspired, you can work all day, have the most actually productive day ever. You still have time to work out. You feel happy to cook, call your mom, take a walk, play with your dog. It's like somehow time expands and you get so much done, where days where you're coming from trauma mirage, it feels very exclusive. It's the only thing you can work on. You find yourself weeks at a time not connecting with friends, not exercising, dropping your healthy eating habits. It becomes it's one dimensional is what I talk about when I talk about this with my clients. Your life becomes one dimensional. This is the only thing that you're focused on creating. Montana says, this is resonating so hard, and it's exactly the message I needed to hear right now. I am so happy to hear that. I'm telling you, this is a game changer. So notice, this is an exercise that I do with my clients, where when we notice there's this kind of trauma mirage energy coming in, I ask them, how many dimensions does your life have? If you are just solely focused on making a certain amount of money before you feel that you can open up and bring in the totality of your life, you're chasing a trauma mirage. You're never going to reach that point. So you have to start to build in other dimensions to your life. If the only dimension to your life is work, that fucking sucks. It doesn't matter how successful you become. You'll just have a very successful one-dimensional life. Right? Where are the friendships? Where is the nourishment? Where is the movement? Where are your people? Where is community, connection, spirituality, nature, play, sex? Where is all of that? Because when we come from vision, there's room for all of that. When we come from trauma mirage, there isn't room for all of that because it's a hungry ghost. It consumes all of the energy that you have available to all of those other dimensions. So we can start to crowd out some of that space, though it can be difficult because there is a lot of compulsive energy leading towards this one dimension. But as we start to recognize and layer in, like I had my best friend in town for a weekend, and it occurred to me, wow, I mean, I really need to devote more energy to connection and community and friendship, which I remember all the fucking time and then forget again, in my life. But when I'm coming from vision, the friendship comes first. I don't even have to find space for it. Are you starting to understand what I'm talking about? Let me know if you are. One of the last pieces, and I think perhaps one of the most important, is that you actually are progressing. you're actually progressing. And I mean this in two ways. I mean, you're actually physically progressing in the material world toward this vision, and you energetically feel like you're getting somewhere. Because so often, and this is where actually the name Trauma Mirage came from, when we're chasing a trauma mirage, years and years ago, I was in Peru with my husband and we were backpacking. Actually, that's how we met, backpacking. And we were on this trip in a place, I can't remember what it was called now, but it was this massive, massive, massive desert. And in the middle of this desert, there was an oasis. And it was just this literal beautiful lake in the middle of this completely, like, picture the Sahara desert with fake palm trees and pools. It was really, really cool. But when we were traveling through the desert to get to this place, we were starting to talk about a mirage. And a mirage is when, in case you don't know, I don't know, first day on earth, you're moving through the desert and you see what looks like this oasis. But the closer you get, it's like it starts to disappear or it keeps getting further away. That's what it feels like to be chasing a trauma mirage. So I'll share a personal story about this, which was that when my husband and I were talking about moving to Denver, we kept getting in really massive arguments. And we don't fight, but the second a conversation about moving came up, we would get in a huge fight. We actually ended up going to marriage counseling because we were like, this does not make any sense. Like, a conversation about moving should not be creating this much tension. And what we had been talking about was I had roped him into my vision for my life, which was geographic independent, free, wealthy, life coach extraordinaire who could live wherever I want. And I'm not making fun of this because it's a really fucking cool vision, but it was a trauma mirage for me. But we live at the beach and we travel all over the world and blah, 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 blah. But we never got any closer. Despite making more money as a coach and like creating a professional career for myself as a coach and earning enough money to be able to do that, it never came to fruition. And it felt like every time I tried to inch it forward, there was this massive energy pushing it back. And so for 6 years, we talked about creating this vision and we never got any closer. And so when I talk about never getting closer, I mean inside and outside. If the thing you want to create just isn't even coming close to coming to fruition, it's something to pay attention to. And I'm not saying diagnose it as a trauma mirage and throw it out the window. It's just something to look at. Because once we got into therapy and we started talking about this issue, it was hard for me to admit that that vision represented the complete opposite of my experience of my childhood. Now, I'm not saying my actual childhood, but I'm talking about my painful, deep, emotional experiences of my childhood. I wanted the freedom to be geographic independent because growing up in a house with addiction, I felt trapped. I wanted to be super wealthy because as a kid, I felt powerless. I wanted to be a famous coach because I felt unloved and rejected and irrelevant. And so when I stepped back and I really looked at that, I'm like, well, that trauma mirage makes perfect sense. It's some sort of vague, made up fantasy refuge from a really painful past life experience. But a trauma mirage can't save you from something that happened 30 years ago. Montana says, you're sharing my story. I know. Don't I know it, babe? Don't I know it? So here's something else to notice when you're kind of feeling into whether something is a vision or a trauma mirage. When our therapist asked, when did you, like, tell me about the origin of this vision? I said, I didn't have one. And I'm not saying that like every vision has to have an origin moment, but often a trauma mirage can have this vague, you've kind of felt like you've always been chasing it, even though you may have not always had the language to explain it. And that was true. I had been chasing this vision in some fashion or form for as long as I could remember, but I couldn't define when I really started to move toward it. And so there's two pieces of that I couldn't really define, and for as long as I can remember, because a lot of the time, trauma mirages are very vague. They might even be always kind of like ever changing. When you talk about what you want or you close your eyes and you imagine what you want, you might picture a mansion on the beach one day and a super wealthy farmhouse the next. Like so it's kind of like there is no real vision to hold on to. That's a huge part of it. And there's no origin. You've just kind of always been chasing it. And so when you start to see the difference between these things, and I don't know if yeah, no, okay. I just want to make sure that I mentioned the high stakes aspect because not winning at a trauma mirage feels very painful. It feels very high stakes. It feels very desperate. I think desperate is a really good word to explain how we feel when we're coming from trauma mirage. And so as you're hearing this and as you're listening to it, the first step is honestly to get honest with yourself. And this is hard for two reasons. One, it feels like if I admit that my vision is actually completely or even in part trauma mirage, it feels like I can't have it. And this is really important to know because if it feels like I can't have my trauma mirage, there is a part of you who created that feels like, oh shit, then I'm stuck with my trauma. Then I'm stuck in this emotional past experience that I had. Because look, the reality is that unless you process and let go of the painful life experiences that you had in the past, they're still live in your system. The pain is still there. That anxiety that you're feeling, that anger that bubbles up unexpectedly, the feelings of not being good enough or being a total inferiority complex that just are ever present, that's fucking trauma. That's unresolved trauma. That's unresolved pain. And that's okay. One of the things we're never taught about, one of the things that we're never taught, one of the things we never learn is how to move that shit when you see it. So it feels like if I look at it, what the fuck do I do with it? And the thing is, just be with it. I know that seems super simple. And if you want to talk more about this, definitely reach out to me. This is exactly what I do. But it's really important to understand that that chasing of that trauma mirage is never going to heal the trauma. It's the way your subconscious, your unconscious has created a fantasy world to live in that should you ever reach it, all that pain would go away. And the reason you feel like you're never there is because either you never get there because the trauma that's actually in there, all that painful experience, actually fucks with you so much that you can't get into the action needed and required to create it. Or, as in my case, you do start to create it, but it feels so unfulfilling and you burn out in the process that you practically throw the whole damn thing away once you get there. Or, in many of the cases of my clients, you create it, but it feels so stressful to upkeep it that you end up being trapped by your successful trauma mirage. That's why it's so important to resolve this. Montana says, full on sobbing because this is exactly what I'm processing, but didn't understand what it was and why I wasn't getting any closer. I'm so glad you're here. I almost didn't do this today. I almost didn't do this. And I love you so much for being here and sharing this with me to remind me, like, just fucking do it. So feel into it and be honest and know that it takes courage to honor and be honest with yourself that this may be, in fact, what you've been chasing. The good news in this that is built in is that when you start to realize it, you feel free. And I don't mean immediately. Because when my husband and I were in therapy and I was starting to acknowledge this, I went through about 4 weeks of grieving. You have to grieve your trauma mirage because it has been your companion for however many years that's been getting you through probably pretty much avoiding or outrunning your painful past life experiences that you didn't know how to process. So your trauma mirage has been your co-pilot, your companion, your friend on the journey, your North Star. An illusory North Star, but a North Star nonetheless. And so it really does require you to slow down and grieve it and then settle in to your body and realize that a trauma mirage traps you as much as your past. And so letting it go is very, very, very freeing. The second reason why it's hard to admit if you're chasing a trauma mirage is because it feels like then I can't have what I want. And there's kind of two parts to this. Ryan says, I'm so glad you did this. When you have those nudges, it's the universe telling you that you need the message or someone else does. Thank you for following the nudges. Thank you, Ryan. I love you. And I'm so glad that you're here too. Yeah, I need everything I share. Every fucking thing. Feels like we can't have it. So the second reason is if I admit that it's a trauma mirage, it means I can't have it. Part of this could be the ego just still holding on and not wanting to let go. And part of it is that, like I said, there's some overlap between a vision and a trauma mirage. So it doesn't mean that all aspects of that trauma mirage are no longer a vision. It just means relax a little bit around it. Because one of the big differences between a vision and a trauma mirage is a vision is a journey. And there's an okayness when you're coming from vision. Like it could happen this year, it could happen next year, it could happen in 10 years. I know a lot of the time when I am learning reading into my human design or my numerology, it so often says that my particular human design and numerology, I won't peak professionally or impact wise until I'm in my 50s. And when I'm coming from vision, I'm totally okay with that because I know that every day along the way, life is going to get more beautiful and I'm going to learn so much. But when I'm coming from trauma mirage, that's a prison sentence, right? Like it feels like I can't wait that long. So there's this massive sense of urgency around manifesting a trauma mirage right now. And that actually really blocks our ability to create any vision because urgency usually thwarts creativity and we end up in like busy productivity that doesn't create anything versus really creative, effective work that actually moves us toward our vision. So what I want you to know about that is that being honest and understanding that you're coming from trauma mirage and not vision might mean some aspects do fall away. So I live in Denver. It's pretty far from the beach and it's so dry. It's like a desert. And the ease with which it was created is mind-blowing. I told you earlier that it took us, we talked about moving to the beach for 6 years and it never happened. We couldn't find the right place. We couldn't get the finances together. My husband couldn't find the right jobs and blah, 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 blah. Once I cleared this and understood that this was trauma mirage and I grieved it and I let it go, we ended up in Denver in 6 weeks. We moved cross country in a pandemic with a 2-year-old and a dog in 6 weeks. And our household income went down in the process because my husband took a pay cut to come out here. So all those logistical things went away. And since we've been out here, things are just falling into place in a way that is mind-blowing because I'm more aligned with what's possible versus being really hard set on this vague, specific, but unreachable moving target. And so I didn't get what I wanted, but what's really interesting that's unfolding is that my husband and I are on so much more of the same page that we're talking about like, hey, maybe in a couple of years we could buy a beach house in Mexico, which wasn't on the table before because the other thing that's important to know about a trauma mirage, it's very restricting. Like it has to be here. It can't, like it had to be in the US. Like there was all this really detailed specific restriction on it where now that we're coming from vision, it's more guided. It's more free flowing. We took a trip to Mexico in May and we're like, hey, what about a house here? And then we could be here and there. And so it ends up being a little bit more fluid. Let me know if this is resonating. So it doesn't mean you can't have what you want. But that leads me to the last thing that I want to share around shifting this for you, which is start to ask yourself, what else could I want? And that is a dangerous question for someone who is driven by a trauma mirage. Because the trauma mirage is the only thing that will save you from a thing that you cannot be saved from. So when you start asking yourself, what else could I want? It is, at first it can feel a little like, I don't know, like the first answer is, I don't know, because you haven't actually given your mind that bandwidth probably ever. But if you keep asking it, it's kind of not kind of, it's fucking fun and it's freeing and it opens a lot up. So this is a really funny and silly, but I love this example. When my husband and I got married 7 years ago, uh, I swore I would never want a mermaid style wedding dress. I was like, I know which one and of course I ended up with a mermaid style wedding dress and it looked so fucking good. So what that has kind of taught me and I've laughed about over the years is like, hey, maybe I don't know what I want. Maybe I don't even know who I am, and it became a fun, playful, like if I like mermaid wedding dresses, what else do I like? And then moving to Denver was awesome too. Like I love living in Denver. Where else might I love living? And so it opens up all this possibility. If I wanted a house on the beach, what else might I like? If I didn't ever see myself writing a book and I wrote a book and say, wow, what else might I like to do? And so beginning to ask yourself this question of what else might I like can be so absolutely open up some more of this energy to flow towards possibilities that you're not seeing now because you're so target locked on this one thing. I had a conversation with a woman a few weeks ago and we kind of went into this space and she was devastated because she had just shot and aimed for something that would really bring her trauma mirage to life and she missed. And so she failed and she was absolutely devastated. But then we started to talk about the difference between a vision and a trauma mirage and it resonated with her so much that this moment where she had shot for her dream and fell short and was devastated turned into this completely open-hearted, life-altering, in the best way, moment. And she put what else on a sticky note on her bathroom mirror so that she saw it every day because she had never even considered that there was something else, some other life, some other actual vision for her life that was available, let alone possible. And so, in complete transparency, this is something that I'm still doing, something that I'm still looking at that requires compassion and self grace and slowing the F down because a trauma mirage comes from compulsive brain power where vision comes from the heart. And it doesn't even have, like I said, I want to be really clear that you don't have to go, okay, yeah, this is a trauma mirage, so I'm going to scrap it totally and grieve it and then try to replace it with some other vision. Because I don't really have a vision for my life right now. I'm kind of fucking winging it most days, if I'm being totally honest. There's certain things that I know that I'm pulled toward, but the vision is right in front of me. It's not 10 years out. It's not even 1 year out. It's just more like the question I've been asking myself is, what do I want right now? And another beautiful question to ask yourself to shift into vision is, what do you really want? Like, really want? Like, when I slow down and ask myself what I really want to feel like super, super connected to my husband all the time and like playful and sexy. And I want to feel that way I felt when we were dating, that like just a vibrant, alive, electric feeling. And I want to hang out with my friends. I want to drink good glasses of wine and I want to laugh more than I cry. And I want to feel engaged, plugged in, and turned on to my life. That's what I really want. And if I had that, I don't think I'd give a shit about what the other stuff was, if I'm being totally honest. And when I'm plugged in and I am creating that and I'm actually giving that attention and not just running and 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 running, I feel like other ideas come online. So it's not like the whole thing falls away and that you have to create some new castle in the sky. You just have to start asking, what do I really want? What do I want to feel? What do I want to experience? What do I want to taste? Where do I want to go? And I mean like now. Because I don't know if this is true, but I'm testing this theory that as you live, here's what it is. This I do know is true. You move toward a trauma mirage and you live from vision. That's a big difference. You live from vision. Your vision emerges from living, where our living goes on hold until we catch up to our trauma mirage. So I'll share one final thought with you about this. And I really appreciate you being here and listening to this, because when I came on to do this today, I knew this was an important topic, but I didn't really know all of the things that I was going to share. But I'm really happy with the things that did show up, because I think they're perfect for beginning to suss this out and begin to navigate it. The big difference is an insight that I had. This was one of those, holy crap, this is a life-changing insight. Was I had always, and I often describe this, if you read my book or if you've been in my space for long enough, I'm sure you've heard me say this before. Life to me kind of always felt like running down a road that was crumbling under my feet right as I hit the step. That's shifted a lot in the last couple of years as I've worked on all this internal stuff. But definitely me chasing, right? Running, moving. But I started to have this vision show up just kind of in the back of my awareness, almost missable if I weren't really paying attention. And the vision was this: I was standing on a bullseye and I was looking forward, but I was just standing perfectly still. And then there was this other me that kept stepping into the me on the bullseye and just planting itself in, and just like arriving was the energy. It was arriving. And I just kept showing up. I was like, what is this weird vision that keeps showing up? And the insight that followed it was that I had spent so much of my life trying to hurry up and get to my life, to hurry up and get forward, to create my life out in the future, that was creating all of this dissatisfaction and anxiousness and running, when what was actually required is that my life was waiting for me to show up to it. To me, that was a game changer. What my life was waiting for me to show up, instead of me waiting to get to my life, to start to create my life. Now, I will add that there was a sense of danger associated with that. Because to really show up to your life and stop chasing it does also require that you slow down enough to feel into whatever has you running in the first place. And that requires some compassion, some courage, and just some spaciousness, and realizing that this is an infinite journey that we are on. So I would love to hear, as this unfolds and as you start to notice this, to let me know. Send me a private message, comment on this video, what this means. And I want you to really consider this question. What difference would it make in your life, inside and outside, to come from vision and let go of your trauma mirage? I want you to really take a minute after this video ends. Actually, fuck it, let's do it right now. Like over here, like, anyway, let's do it right now. Close your eyes for a second. Let's just take a second and take a deep breath in. And really feel the tension leave your body on the exhale. Just do that one more time. Deep breath in. Deep exhale. And feel into what difference it would make to release yourself from your trauma mirage and to live in the present from vision, and creating all the felt experiences of what you really want. Just take a couple seconds and just feel into the difference. Hopefully, you can open your eyes if they're not already, but hopefully you notice just what I call a preview. If you notice just a little bit of relaxing in your body, a little bit of expansiveness in your heart opening, or you had an image of something pop up in your mind, that's just a preview, a teeny, teeny, tiny glimpse of what your whole life could feel like if you begin to make this shift. So once again, Thank you for being here. I love you for being here. Ryan says, life was waiting for me to show up. I think I was scared to face myself if I slowed down, maybe of the judgments of my own, judgments of others, or my judgments of myself. Yeah, 100%. 100%. So I'd love to hear from you if you want to share more. I am absolutely here. If you want to dive into actually doing some of the work to let go of your trauma mirage, also here for that. That's some of my best stuff that we do. Have an amazing day. You are incredible. Go after that vision. Move toward that vision would be better language, and show up to your life today.